the nation station, Manx Radio.
One dental clinic, sponsors of Women Today, offer convenient appointment times in the heart of Douglas, so you can fit your dental care into your working day.
Fastamai, good afternoon. This is Women Today on Manx Radio with me, Beth Espy, and it's a Conister Rock special this afternoon where our guest shares with us some music and memories. And we also always welcome suggestions for guests, as you can hear in the Conister Rock archive on the Manx Radio website. We have invited all sorts of people to the Rock, from politicians and musicians to authors and sports stars. And occasionally, as has happened today, some people suggest themselves, put themselves forward, and we really do encourage you to do that. If you have some stories to tell or memories to share, do get in touch and let us know. womentoday@manxradio.com. So let's meet today's guest then, who got in touch after hearing Conister Rocks one day while walking around the block. He owns and edits his own weekly news magazine called City News, and he co-hosts a 2-hour talk show on the principal commercial radio station in Canberra, 2CC. And what is probably of real importance to us is that he is Manx-born and almost bred, having left the island as a young teenager, just after Manx Radio started, actually, in 1964. So it is a real pleasure to say, Ian Meikle, welcome to the Isle of Man.
Well, thank you, Beth. It's lovely to be back on the island, and especially nice to be sharing some time with you on the Nation Station. I might say the circumstance of my offering myself up, it sounded terribly egotistical. It wasn't. It was. I was, as you said, I was shuffling around the block in very cold autumn weather, and I heard the interview you had with an American guitarist, I think he was. He had a particular style of guitar, and I was quite captivated. I thought, well, that's interesting. They seem to be happy to talk to anybody. I wonder if she'd like to talk to me. And lo and behold, you said yes, so here we are.
Here we are indeed.
Now, I might say you've got listeners in Australia tonight. It's 11 o'clock at 11:08 on the east coast, and I know there are people in Sydney listening. And I know there are people in Canberra, which is the national capital of, a bit like Douglas really, of Australia, and in Adelaide, which is in South Australia, the capital of South Australia, where my sister Moira, who shared the island and my growing up here together, so she is particularly interested and promised to stay up late, at least till 10:30 to listen.
Oh, how wonderful. Well, we encourage them to get in touch, manxradio.com, just drop us an email. But I have to say, you definitely have lost your Manx accent, haven't you?
You think so?
Yeah, you've got a bit of a twang.
I get told the opposite. I'm in a sort of no man's land with the accent, I suppose. Because people say, oh, he's Manx, they say on air. I get plenty of ragging for the accent, and I suppose your listeners will be laughing because I don't sound particularly Manx.
Not particularly.
No,
not particularly. Okay, let's go back then. Let's start with your early days, where you were born over here, grew up around the Douglas and Onken area.
Jane Crookle maternity home with the stork on the roof.
I suppose you don't really remember that particular
I was
part of your
told.
life.
Well, as a child, I was taken back. In fact, you talk about early memories. My first early memory was about 3, and we went around to pick my sister up. And of course, I believed that the stork on the roof had delivered her well. Little I know it was going to ruin my life completely, but so I was a great believer on the stork on the roof. But yes, I grew up around Douglas. Went to Murray's Road Primary School, which is now gone. I mean, they've filled the playground with another school, and then there was St Andrew's Church, and that's gone. Each time I come back, there's a little bit of me being sort of killed off. I suppose that's progress.
I suppose it is. Well, that's what some people call it, isn't it? Your dad had a grocery shop, didn't he, on Market Hill?
He did. It was called Market Hill Stores. It's a hairdresser's now on Market Hill, and he was a grocer. He was from Scotland. He was a holiday maker. He stayed at my grandparents' after the war, Second World War. He'd come over and he stayed with my grandparents at Beach Crest, which was a private hotel. We won't call it a boarding house. Private hotel on just opposite. What's the castle?
Castlemaine.
Castlemaine in sad disrepair. It's so sad. And across the road, all her it's all been apartmentalised now. So it's gone. I mean, so that's gone too.
But how interesting, though, that you were part of that sort of scene in the heyday of tourism over here. Do you remember much about that?
Of course I do, yes. I mean, as a kid, 7, 8, 9, 10. Summers were wonderful because my mother would help out at the boarding house, and my father would be busy in his grocery shop, and we were just left. We were given, I suppose, 2 or 3 striped T-shirts from Marks and Spencer's, a pair of sandals, and so dispatched to the beach. And I might say, I couldn't imagine sending children to the beach at that age these days, but I couldn't swim. And I couldn't swim until I went to Australia after the age of 14. So miserable is the Irish Sea, and so uninviting. I never sort of, started splashing any deeper than my knees if I could help it.
You did go around collecting discarded bottles, though, didn't you?
I did. The sort of 5 o'clock dinner gongs. I remember a day on Douglas Beach where all the deck chairs were out, and there were donkeys, and it's unbelievable now. It's so wonderfully free, but there they were full, and you'd hear the dinner gongs going, and people would sort of lowing. They would head up to boarding house to have dinner. I mean, amazing that people would have dinner, bed, and breakfast in the same place. They didn't eat out like we do now. So they would dutifully go, and in their wake there would be bottles, and they were worth threepence deposit. So my sister and I would sort of comb the central promenade beach and, end up with a few bobs. So we were quite industrious in that sense.
Talking of the beach then, it takes us to the first piece of music you've chosen. What is it and why?
Well, this is I've selected music that were constrained only by my closing years and living on the Isle of Man. So I apologise to our listeners for some of them, but they're a bit cloying. But this one I loved it, and I still love it today. It's the Beach Boys. It's called "I Get Around," and I remember seeing it. I had this what they laughingly called a transistor radio, which is like the size of a suitcase, and I was sitting up in splendid isolation on the upper deck of a red bus going to Onken. That was right. Yellow was the corporation, red were outside the borough, weren't they? And so I was on the red bus heading along, and as we went along the promenade, in Douglas Bay, just at the distance, was Radio Caroline was broadcasting on its way to anchor itself somewhere, godforsaken spot in the Irish Sea. So they went. They would go there and played. But I remember this because I was sitting on top. I may have had one of those horrible little earpieces on, those little thin things that were just one ear, and I listened to this wonderful song.
I Get Around by the Beach Boys, and memories there for our Conister Rock guest Ian Meikle, watching Radio Caroline across Douglas Bay. How important was it listening to radio?
It was sensational because all we had was BBC, and a lot of people wouldn't realise how suffocating that was. And at night, sort of with this with my treasured transistor radio, which actually I took to Australia and it got stolen. So. I think I got naturalised as it was on that basis, but the gigantic stereo and I were the best of friends, and we would sit at night, and other people would recognise this, tuning in to the variable frequency of Radio Luxembourg as it sort of came in and then would fade away and come in and fade away. So the arrival of the pirate radio ships was a complete catharsis, because there was a pent-up generation or generations of people who just wanted choice. And right now, we said, well, hey, everybody, we're going to go back to 3 or 4 channels of BBC radio. How do you feel about that? You'd have people coming up, marching up to Douglas Head here and, demanding you get broadcasting again. So it was a very difficult period for people, but Radio Caroline was wonderful. And they also played these crazy Manx ads, because the island was a source of revenue for them. And I unwittingly bought an album in more recent years, which was the sort of best of Radio Caroline. They had some of the announcers. I mean, they restaged it, but they played the ads on this. And the ads are hilarious, just wonderful things.
Well, while you're over, you're going to have to listen to our show Carnaby Street, which goes out on a Saturday morning at 8:30, which has got some pretty interesting ads on there from
good.
times gone by. You are listening to Conister Rocks here on Manx Radio, 17 minutes past 2, and with our guest Ian Meikle this afternoon, a Manxie who's returned from down under just for a short time. If you'd like to get in touch, 166 177 if you'd like to text, or you can email studio@manxradio.com, particularly if you're one of those relatives listening in Australia.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Abbey Dental, sponsors of Women Today, for all aspects of today's dental care. Highly recommended throughout the Isle of Man.
And we're on the Conister Rock this afternoon with Ian Meikle, a Manxie who's returned from down under for a few days, and we're finding out a little about his early years here, growing up on the Isle of Man. And as you mentioned, Ian, you went to Murray's Road Primary School, then Ballacameen and Douglas High School, which was for boys then. How were your school days? What sort of schoolboy were you?
Well, I thought I was getting along reasonably well, but in more recent years, I decided I used to come back typically in the summer when the school was closed, and there was one year I came back and the school was open, and I got in touch by sending a facsimile to the principal or the headmaster in those days. His name was George, and I've forgotten his surname, but we were contemporaries at Douglas High School for boys, and George was from Peel from memory, so he was a country boy, and of course the divide between country boys and the city guys or townies was quite obvious. Anyway, George is very gracious and sort of held my hand and got me into what was the principal's office, which is, if you'd gone in at our age, when we were younger, there was only one conclusion you were there for. It wasn't there to congratulate you. Anyway, George is very generous. He gave me an acrylic school tie and confessed that he'd taken some time to look me up. And reported rather worryingly that I left no footprints.
Oh.
So academically,
how do you feel
I just
about
passed.
that?
I'm nonplussed. It didn't bother me at all, but I thought it was rather funny that I left no footprints at the Douglas High School for boys.
You were there at primary school, devoted to one of your teachers.
I was. I thank you, yes, for reminding me. There were two teachers I can remember from the primary school there. There was Mrs. Butterfield, who I was just absolutely devoted. I'm pretty sure she taught me to write. And Mrs. Butterfield was the completely epitome of a wonderful teacher as a 5-year-old. We've all got one. I was in love in a sort of childish way with this wonderful female figure. And then from memory, towards the end of my time at Murray's Road, I had a teacher. I think his name was Mr. Griffith. It's funny how we don't remember any first names. The teachers didn't have first names, and they obviously lived at the school because they didn't have a life. Anyway, Mr. Griffith taught me to hate my handwriting. I'm left-handed. And I can still remember him. He looked up, in front of the class. He said, "Meikle," he said, "your handwriting's enough to give anyone indigestion." He was Welsh, if you were wondering what
right, I did wonder.
He was Welsh, and I was scarred for life by him. So I was both sort of loved and reviled at Murray's Road High School. But I was there at the same time. The Bee Gees were there too. But we probably come to that later.
I think we probably will.
Yeah.
But talking about music, though, you explored your musical side while at secondary school in the inaugural Ballacameen School Band.
I was a founding member of the inaugural Ballacameen Band. I, rather unwisely, and if any children listening don't do this, I forged my father's signature and joined up. And not thinking this through, I turned up at home with what was called an E-flat horn. Not something you can disguise or just wonder, like somebody's going to say, "What's that?" Anyway, I turned up with rather brightly and said, "I've joined the band and they want $2 a week or something for the hire of the instrument." And anyway, my father took my early forgery attempts in good grace and continued to allow me to perform with the E-flat horn, but unfortunately I showed absolutely no promise and mercifully was put out of their misery in the first year. I think I did one concert. It was unforgettable.
Right. What about you playing Peter and Gordon songs in one of your friends' garages?
Oh, in Alberta Drive. And you've reminded me off air who I was playing Peter and Gordon songs with. I had a snare drum, which I'd bought for $5 somewhere, and nothing else. So you had to have tea chests to make up all the rest of the drum kit. So we had what the Americans quaintly call a garage band, And so I'm in the garage band, and also in the band, because I think they may have either had a guitar or borrowed a guitar, or there's enough, was in his father's garage. His father was an accountant up on Alberta Drive. I lived in Furman Road, just down the road in Onken, and he was a school friend of mine. And I can remember him as Ernie Earnshaw, but of course you've reminded me that he's Adrian Earnshaw, former MHK. So Ernie, if you're out there, son, we should get together and do a couple of choruses of anything by Peter and Gordon, which were ghastly songs.
We look forward to that. Speaking of concerts, actually, we've had an email in. Good afternoon, folks. I have just finished a gig and I'm now at home with my girlfriend Tara, listening and enjoying the interview with my uncle Ian. Isn't technology wonderful? And that is from Heath.
Oh, Heath, yes. Heath is a singer-songwriter in Adelaide, and he plays at gigs, and he's a very good performer, by the way.
Yes,
I have
possibly
to get him
unlike
over.
you. I don't mean that. I'm sure your Peter and Gordon songs were
No,
wonderful.
he got the musical genes. They clearly jumped my generation.
What you do now, and we will come to this a little bit later, but you own and edit your own weekly news magazine called City News. And actually, your involvement with print media started at an early age, but actually, initially you were delivering papers rather than writing in them.
Well, a bit of both, actually. But yes, I both appeared in print here first, but my first experience was delivering papers. A summer job. I've forgotten the name. It was the first job I got sacked from. It was a merciful release. I had a huge green canvas bag and a bicycle, and I had to go around and insert newspapers around Onken. So this is on the main road of Onken, just near where the post office is, the little newsagent on the corner there. And so they would label all the addresses, and I had to then get on the bike, or there were a crew of us, and head off. And balancing act until you got about halfway through your round was rather dangerous, but I did it. And what I look back with see as quite quaint, but you wouldn't see it as quaint, is putting papers and stuffing things through doors. Because in Australia there are letterboxes like the American style, where they're at the end of your garden. That's for the mail, and papers tend to get thrown onto your lawn. So I clearly wasn't cut out for this. And I can remember putting these one summer morning, because we used to have to get up early when the boat came in with the morning papers. And I think that might have been what did me in the end, that I wasn't as diligent about getting up as I should have been. But I did. I was inserting these papers into the into doors, and you had to be careful you didn't rip them, because then they complained to the newsagent I was stuffing too thick, and the magazines would go in. Anyway, it was this terrible morning, a summer's morning. I am to this day a completely obsessed Beatle fan, and there I was. Reading with horror, and I had this huge canvas bag of this miserable news that the Beatles had been knocked off the charts by the Four Pennies. I mean, Four Pennies, really? I don't even know if they ever got a second hit. Anyway, they had this ridiculously, what would you call it? It's a cloying, awful song called Juliet, which actually, there are moments, if I've drunk enough, I actually think it's rather sweet.
Okay, well, let's see if you think it's rather sweet now, shall we?
Things you do, reminiscent of you, Juliet.
We're not going to play too much of
No,
that,
I'm
Ian.
getting acne listening to it. It's terrible.
Memories for you, though, of that band that knocked your heroes, the Beatles, off the top of the charts. I love the fact you said it was the first job you were sacked from. I feel that there are probably more stories.
No. I've been very virtuous. I used to for the Onken Corporation. What's it called, the stadium, Onken Stadium. I used to work as a roustabout there for a couple of bob a night, and we used to also have to go around. There were runs through Douglas in the height of the holiday season, where we would deliver leaflets, brochures about what was coming up at the stadium. and we would be assembled by a member of the council, a employee of the council. His name, and again, how deferential we were, his name was Mr. Binns, Binns, and Mr. Binns would dutifully take us to where our run was, and I often did the whole promenade. And I remember there was just hotel after hotel after hotel. You ran up the stairs, you went in and left these notes in the foyer, ran down, ran up, and then Mr. Binns was waiting for us as we all came panting at the end of this run and gave us 3 and 6 in cash, and we were very grateful for the work. So, and I never got sacked from that.
What about your work at the Examiner then? Because your uncle got you into this. He was a journalist.
He did. My uncle Rod Comish was a reporter at the Examiner when it was in Athol Street. And he'd given me my first break in print. Well, the job was a Saturday afternoon in the winter. You had the prerequisite. You simply had to have the ability to write, and I'd overcome my the trauma of Mr. Griffith, and I have a workable bicycle. And you were dispatched to the second division matches in this appalling weather. Where at halftime they would ply you with tea that curled my hair. It was just extraordinary. The spoon would stand upright in it. Anyway, we would. The job was you had to accurately find out every time a goal was scored. You had to find out who scored it, and then what the total of the thing was, and then at the final whistle, you had to leg it back to Athol Street, go panting up to somebody who must have been the editor or an editor, and drop the what I now understand is copy, drop the copy on his desk, and this was for the green final. Which, I mean, it's astonishing when you think about it. There was a Saturday afternoon publication of sports results from all around the island, printed and then distributed only on Saturday afternoon on green paper. And I went down, because it was cold, you go down into the press. Typically you call them a press hall, but this was actually more of a press room. And you sit there, and this wonderful, I'd love to see it again. I'd love to see what it was really, now I know more about presses. It's beautiful old, well-kept, creaking old press, and then it would sort of shudder to life, and then that incessant ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk of newspapers coming off, and it's a rhythm of my life in many respects. I love that sound, and you pick up the green final and tear yourself away from the warmth of the press room and head down to my dad's grocery shop and just double check that they got my 2 lines right.
Something else you did a little bit later on was write about rock and roll and do reviews.
Oh, well, yes, I was. This was in Adelaide, at the Adelaide Advertiser. I was a general reporter there, and I suppose we would call them perks. I'm not sure whether you understand the subtlety of that. Yes? Okay. So it was a perk. It was an extra job, and so I'd write a record review column and would interview stars as they came through Adelaide. Now, Adelaide's the capital of South Australia. The population is broadly about 1 million people, so it's a reasonably big city, and this was the morning broadsheet newspaper in a 2-paper town.
But you saw some pretty incredible names here in the Isle of Man before you left, and this takes us to
yes,
track
I
3.
Did. I'm sorry, and I think that's where the fascination came. I'm sorry, yes, I saw the Mojos, I saw Honey and the Honeycombs, I think I saw the Swinging Blue Jeans, but that summer, the summer I left in 1964, I'm pretty sure it was, in the Palace Ballroom, rest in peace, or rest in pieces really, there was the Rolling Stones. And because it was going every week, you get tickets. And I went along to the Rolling Stones. I would have been 14. And there they were. They came on. They were everything the Beatles weren't. They were rough, tough, and they played behind. Obviously, the Manx safety constraint was obvious. They stayed behind what we call a cyclone fence. A fence, a see-through fence made of wire fence, which stopped things being thrown at them. And the foyer was like a battlefield of girls passed out and the ambulance people reviving them, and it was chaos. And it was their song at the time, their single at the time was "It's All Over Now," in which Brian Jones, who subsequently left the band and then subsequently died, played a 12-string guitar. I didn't even know you could get a 12-string guitar. No internet in those days to check, guitars' strings. So I would watching this wonderful performance. I think it was probably crap really, but it was a wonderful performance for a 14-year-old, and it absolutely I became transfixed by rock and roll, and that moment really happened that summer in the Palace Ballroom.
The Rolling Stones, All Over Now, and memories for our Conister Rock guest Ian Meikle of the summer of 1964 when they played at the Palace Ballroom. This is Conister Rocks on Manx Radio. We'll be back in just a moment.
Manx Radio, the nation station. Manx Radio.
Abbey Dental, sponsors of Women Today, for all aspects of today's dental care. Highly recommended throughout the Isle of Man.
And we're on the Conister Rock today, sharing music and memories with Ian Meikle, and really is stirring up some memories for some of the listeners as well. Ian, Karen's been in touch to say, bringing back so many memories. Went to most places that this man went to, and remember the Oncom booklets, those flyers that you were talking about as well. And with regard to the Rolling Stones concert, we've had a text saying, ask your guest, does he remember the police dog sitting on the side of the stage when the Stones were on?
I sort of do, and I'm not faking it. I actually think I think the correspondent is right, but. On mature reflection, I'm not sure whether the police were trying to protect the girls of the Isle of Man from the Stones, or the Stones from the audience, but it worked.
Well, we've heard a little bit about what it was like for you growing up in your formative years here, but at the age of you were 14 when your family decided to emigrate to Australia. What was it that prompted that decision?
Well, my father had the grocery shop, as I mentioned, on Market Hill, and with sort of a characteristic I never really credited him with some real foresight. He could see these supermarket things would take off, and really the local grocer was doomed. And also my sister and I living on a small island, there was a sense of inevitability that we might leave. So to keep the family together, they picked us both up and took us to the other side of the world, where we couldn't run away, I suppose. But and that worked. We lived in Adelaide, and both my parents have died now. But we lived in Adelaide, and so that was correct. They were able to evoke and maintain a family arrangement. We also took my grandmother, and then a few of her sisters sort of percolated into South Australia as well. So Australia's been very, very good for us. But it doesn't take away from our respect of our Manx heritage, of course.
We'll talk more about that in just a moment. I want to go to the fourth piece of music that you've chosen, and you've already told us that the Beatles were your heroes.
Yes, they were. And why is this one significant? Well, it was the last album before I left the Isle of Man, and they'd only had a couple before that. Look, I can't put any drama. I have to identify what it is. It's Hard Day's Night, the movie, when it came out. It was playing at the cinema in Walpole Street, and I've forgotten the name of the cinema, but was it the Regency? Something like that. Cinema in Walpole Street for the summer. And in those days, films would stay there for weeks on end. Because the population was constantly changing with visitors. So if there was something interminably awful film on, it stayed on. And they didn't sort of change every Thursday as they might normally do. So there was no escaping some of them. But of course, the gift of that was Hard Day's Night came on and that summer, and it stayed on in Walpole Street. And of course, it was a sort of a badge of pride to go and see it. The frequent number of times you saw it was oh yes, I've seen Hard Day's Night now 5 times, 6 times. I think I may have lied at 7. I fancy I peaked at 5, but I can remember sort of going along, coming out of Walpole Cinema and then Walpole Street Terrace, Walpole Street,
Walpole
Road, whatever. Anyway, down there. And then heading across the sands to my grandmother's boarding house, and sort of singing these songs. And the title track is the one I particularly love.
It's been a hard day's night, and I've been working like a dog. It's been a hard day's night, I should be sleeping like a log. But when I get home to you, I find the things that you do will make me feel alright.
A Hard Day's Night from the Beatles, and memories for Ian there of the movie that opened at the old cinema in Walpole Avenue, a text has just told us, but we don't know the name of the cinema, so if you know that, just get in touch, let us know. 166 177. So much more to talk to you about, Ian, but you did move to Australia in 1964 after you finished your schooling days. Your career in journalism really took off. You're married to Janice. You have 2 children and 4 grandchildren. Janice, we should say, is sitting in the studio on the sofa in the corner there, having to mute. Yes, she was invited to speak. She decided not to.
Not a word has she got for the Manx nation. It's shameful.
But you come over quite a lot, though, still, don't you?
We had the good fortune of popping backwards and forwards with some frequency, yes.
And do you still have family over here?
Well, I have Barbara and Jeff Quayle, who are usually our host. Their daughter Sophie is getting married tomorrow in St George's. Which would be lovely, because I haven't been to St George's Church since 1963 when my uncle got married. So it's been a long time since I've been in St George's Church. I'm looking forward to that.
It was the Regal.
The Regal. Oh,
that was it. Thank you very much to everybody who's... although somebody else has said it's the Royalty Cinema. So it's either Royalty or Regal, but there's a certain Regal...
Well, it begins with an R.
It begins with an R, we know that. But yes, apparently it was... Lots of people are actually saying that's a Royalty Cinema in Walpole Avenue, so right. We remain to... So we'll go with that. You do so much now, as we talked about the weekly magazine that you own and edit. You also do a 2-hour talk radio show.
And this is killing me. I do 2 hours on Sundays. It's called my paper's called the City News. It's called the City News Sunday Roast, and it's a talk show. And I ask the questions. So I've got to tell you, Beth, this is killing me. I want to ask you questions. I'm sitting behind a microphone answering.
I noticed you've had to sit with your arms folded. You want to be pushing the buttons. I get that. You still keep in touch with the Isle of Man. You do listen to Manx Radio.
I do, yeah.
I'm intrigued by this. Your guilty pleasure, you say, is Manx Gold. What is that?
Oh, Manx Gold. It's a joke in the family. Manx Gold is just a bit of silliness on my part. It's a big bowl of steaming hot custard.
Okay.
Preferably birds.
Right. So not really Manx at all.
Well, it is to me, and the kids all call it Manx Gold now. So it's just taken off as an echo of my heritage, even though custard doesn't loom particularly large at the Manx Museum, to my observation.
We haven't got much time to talk about the sort of the print media side, but it's interesting, isn't it? Because people would say print media has had its day, but you clearly see that there's still very much a demand for it, and from a journalism point of view, I'm intrigued by this, and I read this about you. You say you might not agree with what people say, but you absolutely defend their right always to say it.
Well, you've done your homework. Oh, you saw that. Yes, I do. And our publication, as my career has been, is to be very pluralistic in looking at people's views. So, if somebody wants to write a reply, they get a right to reply, even if they're wrong. And I defend people's right to have a say and have an opinion, because that's about democracy and it's about freedom.
You also have issues with what you call the destructive power of social media. Now, that's something that's really impacted on journalism as a whole.
I think it is a destructive power, and I don't want to be a wowser about this. It's not to talk it down. I think social media is a very binding way for people to socially meet and stay in touch with their relatives and their friends. I think where it goes dangerously wrong is when you're seeing people like President Trump, tweeting and disturbing relationships. What is it, 160 characters or something? You can't put a cogent case for anything in that space. And I think there's the danger of miscommunication. So social media can be a real benefit, and I see the virtue of it. But I think people who think that that's where they should get their news are sorely mistaken. And what we're seeing now is that people are gravitating back to regular brands that they know and can trust, like Manx Radio, the Examiner, places where they know that the work is put together with care and professionalism.
Ian, we can clear it up about the cinema. It was the Regal on Victoria Street and the Royalty on Walpole Avenue. Thank you very much to Texter, whose number ends in 896, for clarifying that.
You.
Now we know.
Now we know.
So much more we could talk to you about, Ian. We do hope you enjoy your stay and the wedding this weekend. Do come back and see us when you are next over. But it is time for your 5th and final piece of music. Incredibly poignant. Tell us what you've chosen and why.
Well, I don't. Yes, this is. When I was at Murray's Road Primary School at the same time, the Bee Gees were there. Well, what turned out to be the Bee Gees, or the three brothers. They don't remember me, and I must confess I don't remember them. But as a joke, much like Manx Gold, I sort of stylised myself among friends as I was the fourth Bee Gee, because I went to the same school. And of course, when poor Morris succumbed, late of this parish, there was a very big Manx presence in the Isle of Man, Morris. When he succumbed, I described myself as the third. And when poor Robin died, I sort of became the second Bee Gee, and short of having a word with Barry, he decided to break the band up. So I'm an ex-Bee Gee without ever having sang with them. However, I do have a small story, and that is that the Bee Gees did a tour of the world called One Night Only, where they cherry-picked particular stadiums around the world, and they did one concert. So they didn't do a season, they didn't do a tour. They went and did one concert, and the one concert they did in Australia was in Sydney. There's about 90,000 people. That's probably almost the population of the island. In one stadium, it was the first night of using the stadium before the Sydney Olympics, so it was a bit of a test run. They came out, they played a beautiful set, which is largely represented on the album, but they also played Ellen Vannon. And it was wonderful.
Ian,
90,000 people didn't have a clue what they were doing.
a perfect way to end. Thank you so much for sharing music and memories with us this afternoon.
Thanks for having me, Beth.
When the summer day is over, its busy cares have flown, I will sit beneath the starlight with a weary heart alone. Then it rises like a vision.
One Dental Clinic, sponsors of Women Today, offer convenient appointment times in the heart of Douglas, so you can fit your dental care into your working day.